since the day that Gary Rosenblatt communicated to you that he wanted to talk about your pal sex life?
Always a good phone call to get, right?
Yes.
Right. From Gary. Blessings to Gary.
Yeah. Okay, Mark, I came here to Salt Lake City with just one simple question. Tell me about your life since the day that Gary Rosenblatt communicated to you that he wanted to talk about your pal sex life.
Always a good phone call to get, right?
Yes.
Right. From Gary. Blessings to Gary. Okay, let me give you a little bit of the unfolding. As you know, Gary, and I think I don't follow the blogs, but I believe this on the blogs. I believe perhaps even in a conversation with you that a particular, I'm not going to mention anyone by name, but a particular rabbi, and may he be blessed, right? Who's been very, very much my nemesis for almost 25, 30 years. Someone I barely know, but who I apparently kind of represent something to. Is a very, very good friend. I think he says it on your blog with Gary Rosenblatt.
Yes.
Right? And it's one of the complex things of Jewish journalism. And as you would expect, you have objective journalism, but as people say very openly, no one's even embarrassed about it. And there's this old kind of, old boy system. This particular rabbi says, I'm very good friends with Gary Rosenblatt. So clearly there's no objectivity here. When an old close friend of yours calls you and tells you something, then clearly you look at it in a particular way. And what's so funny about the Jewish community is, and with blessings to all, that no one even tries to hide it. Right? In an open conversation with you, he says, this guy's an old close friend of mine, I have real influence there, meaning there's no objective journalism. There's no, which is kind of a sad thing. And I don't mean that, Gary, I'm sure you're listening to this somewhere. I don't mean that as a vicious critique. I just mean that's just the way it is. There's a group of people that know each other, that went to YU together. I'm very much not of that group. And maybe that's the first part of my experience I can kind of talk about. If I can just share with people what Luke said when the tape recorder was off, which I thought was just very nice. He talked about the difference between, citing, some feminist, masculinist theorists, in this case Dennis Prager, that you ask a guy a question, he'll give you all the theory, and you ask a girl a question, she'll give you the details. And, Luke wants the details. And Luke and I have agreed that, we're not going to talk about, this or that, sexual detail, not about Luke's sex life, not about Gary Rosenblatt's sex life, not about the rabbis, not about mine. We're not going to slander anyone, but we're going to actually talk about the story as opposed to just, theories. So, maybe to begin there,
what were you feeling when he first said that?
Well, so the first feeling was just how much I'm not in the old boys network. And that was actually my first feeling.
Really?
My first feeling was like, I'm so unprotected. That was my first feeling.
Wow.
And I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. Send blessings to my parents. I left home when I was 13 years old to go to a yeshiva high school. I left home for a lot of reasons. Complete blessings to my parents. It was a complex home. I decided to go to yeshiva in New York, and it never became part of the system. Never had an uncle, to kind of help out. Never had, my rabbi. So I was always very much, a maverick in the system, from very, very young, and never was part of that network that kind of protects, that kind of takes care of. And I don't say protects in a negative way, by the way. I'm not talking about a negative protection, for example, in the old boys network in the Catholic Church, which protects pedophiles. That's a negative protection. I'm talking about a positive sense of home, and not feeling a kind of sense of radical vulnerability. So, and I'll get back to it, but so when Gary called me, kind of the first experience I had was, Gary's an old insider. I knew before it was written on your blog that he was close friends, with this particular rabbi, who doesn't seem to be all that bent, on my, positive, unfolding in life. Is that a nice way to say it? Right? And so, so it just, it kind of, there was something in me that my heart dropped.
What date was it?
This was, I think,
first approached you.
Well, I'll tell you, actually, it was even before that. I remember actually where I was. I was teaching at a retreat center, and someone handed me a copy of the Jewish Week, which is Gary's newspaper, and it said there, and people have urged me to look into stories.
Oh, various stories, and he talks about one philandering rabbi.
A philandering rabbi who changed his name and moved to Israel. So it was clear
that was the first tip-off that you had.
Right. So it was clear to me, right, that that obviously this rabbi had gone, right, that I was fully in their sights.
You're in his gun sights.
You're in his gun sights.
Woo!
These guys want to take me down. And again, I'm not going to talk about any particular person. I'm not going to share anyone's private sexuality. But, it's very clear. I know within, Gary's own circle of friends, wonderful people, who all have very complex sexuality, on a number of levels. None of them will I detail here. But in other words, so, in all of it, some of it's far more dramatic than my unconventional kind of forays in the world. And so who people pick in journalism to go after has a lot to do with the Old Boys Network. It's got a lot to do with things other than, the things that should motivate a story. That's at least what it seems to me. If Gary wants to call in and correct me on that, I'm happy to have a private conversation with him. We can kind of go through what's actually going on out there and why you pick a particular thing. And so it was kind of shocking to me. And, and I remember when I read on, your blog, I told you I read two things. I read once, a couple of years ago, your long, rambling essay on me. It wasn't a good essay, Luke. And I remember also reading once the interview you did with this rabbi, and I was just kind of shocked at the unabashedness in which you said, Gary's my old close friend. Just the complete. And so my first sense was vulnerability. It was vulnerability, and I remember where I was, standing by the payphone, and I just got it. How you kind of get, you just made this image of, a rifle sight. I just got it. I said, I'm in these guys' sights. Like, they want to take me down. They want to demonize me. And I knew it wasn't paranoia. You know what I'm saying? In other words, like, I went and talked to someone and they said, no, what are you talking about? But something in my body said, you know what? This is real. This is real. It's nasty. This is not going to be pleasant. I may go down. And I said to myself, I'll get back up. But, I just had this feeling. I just had a very, very bad feeling. So I don't do anything about it. Because what's there to do, right? And that's the first, change name story. That's where it began. This kind of, as I read you from Soul Prince, everything that I've written, every lecture I've given, I always talk about Wingars and Goffney and branchizing it. But it was the first kind of false planting of an idea that somehow I had secretly changed my name to not be Wingars and be Goffney. And I was also, my second feeling was helplessness. Because, as I read you from Soul Prince, which was already published then, where both of my names are there. It's very clear that there was no false name change, but it didn't matter to anyone. I don't know if you ever read, and I'm not going to go macro here, but you read Kafka's Trial, where the facts don't matter so much. And you kind of begin to feel helpless that what should be isn't. And it was a devastating, I can literally call up in my body now the feeling of, when they talk about your heart falling into your stomach, like that's what it felt like. Like, you don't know what that image is, that's just boom, And, worse than when these people left you in that bad neighborhood in L.A. It was like I'm being left in bad neighborhood for like a decade, right? And so that happens. And then, at some point, I don't remember exactly when, and I do remember, I was teaching at Rabbi Michael Lerner, the editor of Tikkuns, and we were teaching a Shabbat there, and then the sister of someone I knew a long time ago, wrote Michael an email saying, we're going to break this big story on Goffney. And it was one of these, it was a story from 30 years ago, which has gotten, where the way that, the lady Vicky Pollan tells the story is like Goffney at 45 is sleeping with a 14-year-old girl. That's the impression you get when you read it. But in fact, I never slept with a 14-year-old girl. I polygraphed that. Never slept with, never had any engagement with that woman actually below the waist, if I can be very direct about it. That's also polygraphed with the best polygraph person in the world. And the way the story is told is 45-year-old Goffney is sleeping with a 14-year-old girl, when in fact Goffney was just out of high school. She was in the first year of high school. I went with her to her high school classes, and it was what you would call a petting, relationship. It was a love relationship. And not just that I'm now rejecting it as a love relationship,